The dark web. I've been into scary stuff since I was a kid. My mom got me into scary movies at a pretty young age, watching Stephen King movies and those 80s campy horror films, because she was into the morbid lifestyle. Well, naturally, being my mother's daughter, I got into that same lifestyle as I got older. Watching YouTube and reading articles, you find some pretty scary stuff that not a lot of people know about. That's how I found out about the deep web. The deepest part of the internet where people can buy drugs and illegal military-grade weapons, post child pornography, and even watch people kill each other. Now I take everything with a grain of salt. People love to make up stories so you won't sleep at night. So of course, with my morbid curiosity, I wanted to debunk or see if these stories had some truth in them. My best friend Joe is a tech guy at one of the universities here in my hometown, so I asked him how I would adventure out into the deep web. He looked at me as if I were stupid, and proceeded to warn me that I shouldn't do something that I knew nothing about. Being the stubborn alpha male that I am, I told him that he needed to shut up and teach me. He nodded his head politely and grabbed my computer. He first went through the steps on how I get there. First, download and install the Tor browsing bundle. The system is configured to use the Tor relay network, which anonymizes your connection through a distributed set of relays to prevent someone from learning your physical location. Second, you go to the built-in wiki page setup just for the deep web. This site, he said, helps you navigate through the matrix and gets you where you need to be. With my excitement, I thanked him and immediately sped home to my apartment. I turned on Spotify, lit some candles, and dimmed the lights so I can start my new adventure. My MacBook Air turned on with a glee-ish tone, and I put my cursor over the Tor symbol. At first I hesitated. Of course I was nervous because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But with a beat thrusting coming from my phone, I clicked on the symbol. Bringing up the wiki page, I started scrolling through some of the pages. As I thought, they were mostly drug-related stuff. If I wanted to buy a pound of heroin, I guess that's the place to go. I then scrolled through a page that looked like a chat room. I could see people's usernames as they're communicating back and forth. I watched for a few minutes just to see what these people were talking about. Then a link popped up. I was intrigued, so I clicked on it. At first it seemed like a normal porno page, one that you find on the internet these days. There was an area where you could click on the hyperlink and go into that room. Going down the page, I saw one that caught my eye. It said, "Sleeping." Beside the words, there was a picture of a young woman in a nightgown, curled up in her bed. Again, I was interested to see what that meant, so I clicked on that hyperlink. At first, all I saw was that same woman in her bed sleeping. There was nothing out of the ordinary about it. This picture looked like a still image, one that you would take with a camera. Then all of a sudden, I could hear a loud popping sound. At first I thought it was coming from the music or my air conditioner coming on since it was 90 degrees outside. But I soon realized it came from this image. I could see the curtains moving, slowly swaying back and forth. Bringing my head up closer to the screen, I could make out the small vent right under the curtains. Is this a live feed? I asked myself. Situated on the right side of the bed was an alarm clock. Looking at the big flashing red numbers, it said 12:01. I quickly looked at my own clock on my computer, and it also said 12:01. What is this? After a few minutes of analyzing this picture, a message popped up in this chat box. It was from the username, a psycho killer. It's time. At that moment, I could see the bedroom door slowly opening. A tall man with a medium build came into view. He had on black sweatpants, black hoodie, and a ski mask. He made his way over to the bed. At first he just stood there watching this woman. He then reaches into his pants and pulls out a huge butcher knife. He glides it across her face, pressing it hard on her cheek. All of a sudden you can see the woman open her eyes. She bolts up out of fear as the man throws her back on the bed. She starts screaming a piercing scream that echoes in my own home. She gets on top of her to hold her down. Without any warning, he puts the butcher knife in the air and slams it into her chest multiple times. The woman immediately becomes limp. The man proceeds to cut her neck as blood spews all over him. He takes his gloves off and starts acting like he's bathing in it, rubbing the dark liquid all over his face and neck. Tears started welling up in my eyes. I ran over to the telephone to dial 911. I knew I couldn't tell them who this man or woman was, but maybe I can help out in some way. As I go back to my chair, I turn to the screen. The man was standing there with a bloody knife in one hand. You could see the blood dripping off the knife onto the hardwood floor, making a puddle. As he came closer to the camera, he waved. Suddenly I heard a ding coming from the chat box. A psycho killer.
You're next.
I shut my computer off and threw it across the room. The whole next day I tried to find out if anyone found the man or woman I saw. I searched high and low on the internet, news sites and articles, but I couldn't find anything. It was like these two people never existed. To this day, I haven't told anyone what I saw on the deep web. I thought I was better off not sharing this information because people would think I'm crazy. I know what I saw. It wasn't some type of horror film or having a vivid imagination. I went onto the web to prove myself wrong, and because of my stupidity, I watch my back every damn day. The Suicide Show. I had never been on the deep web, though the whole thing sounded stupid. Some illicit part of the internet with unknown atrocities lurking in every corner. But I was working on my master's thesis in sociology, and I thought a paper on internet subcultures sounded interesting. I got together with a friend and he talked to me about Tor and showed me different precautions I could take to protect my identity and my computer while browsing the deep web. I was ready to explore this bizarre hive I had heard so much about. Needless to say, for about 2 weeks, I sifted through old websites that looked like they'd been developed during the 90s. Obscure internet relics floating out in the middle of nowhere. Derelict websites forgotten by time. Most of it was boring junk. Lots of Nazi conspiracy theorists, drug traffickers, pedophiles. It was what I expected. I would have been content to do my paper on Nazi subcultures on the deep web, or maybe even pedophiles, but I ran across something that really interested me. It was a forum awkwardly titled Enthusiast of Suicide. The name led me to believe the forum wasn't of English-speaking origin. The forum itself had a multinational array of boards for users from different countries. I saw boards in Spanish, French, Turkish, Chinese, a vast array of boards, but there was one common theme. Everyone on the boards was fanatically obsessed with suicide. People in the English-speaking boards would share different ideas about suicide, how to execute it, how to lessen the pain for people who were afraid of suffering, stories about friends who had committed suicide, suicide fetishists sharing explicit pictures with one another, people having philosophical discussions about suicide. It didn't seem to stop. Then on one of the boards, I noticed some of the people talking about something called the Suicide Show. "It's on tonight. Are you going to watch it?" one would say. "No, I can't. I have a big day tomorrow. I plan on going into work with my .38 and killing my boss. Then I'm going to kill myself," the other would respond. I cringed at reading this. The Suicide Show? If it was what it sounded like, then it would be some kind of webcast with a bunch of people committing suicide? I felt my stomach turn, and my palms were sweaty, but my mind was racing with curiosity. I had to find out what this show was all about. The suicide cult had already given me enough material for an exciting thesis, but this would be the coup de grace. I found out that the show came on at 1 a.m. in my area, and I fished around until I found a link to the show. My throat had a huge knot sitting in it, and I know I must have been sweaty, but I couldn't let my nerves get in the way of my research. I was doing important work here. The live feed came on with an eerie-sounding MIDI playing in the background. The film quality was grainy, as if filmed using a cell phone or a cheap camera. A woman with a microphone held tightly in both hands stood with a forced smile on her face. I could see her mascara had run down her face, as if she had been crying. She looked like she may be in her 40s. She was Asian, and she looked incredibly uncomfortable and afraid. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my nails digging into it. She made me feel uneasy. The whole thing made me uneasy, but this was getting much more strange. She started speaking in a foreign language, so I quickly clicked a button that would display English subtitles on screen. "Welcome to the Suicide Show. I'll be your host for this evening," she said, her pitch shaky and unnerved. Just the sound of her frightened voice made this so much more surreal and slightly nauseating. "Let's start the show," she shouted with uneasy and forced glee. She threw an arm up in the air, her teeth clenched tightly into a nervous smile, and a tear rolling down from one eye. This had to be fake. It was weird, but there was no way I was honestly about to be privy to what I thought I was going to witness. They tried hard to convince me that this was some illicit game show from hell, that this woman was being held against her will like Vanna White at gunpoint, but I wasn't biting. There's no way this was really happening. "Our first contestant is from New York. His name is Robert Howard," she read from a cue card nervously. Looking up at the camera with wild eyes, she then lowered the card. I could see her hands shaking, and the compulsory toothy smile flash again as she lifted a hand to the air. A spotlight highlighted the area around a man sitting in a chair. He had a shotgun in his hands. I felt my nails dig deeper into my armrest. I clenched my teeth and watched on in horror. He lifted the shotgun to his mouth. I saw tears running from his eyes. And he fired. I could see the inside of his mouth light up for a brief second as the shot rang out, startlingly loud. I jerked in my chair from the sound of the blast. I saw his head jerk back briefly as a discharge of brain and blood hit the wall behind him. His head then lurched forward. His upper body slumped ahead, folding in on itself, his head dangling. I could see the top of his head. I could see the blood and the gore, and I could see smoke wafting from where the blast had penetrated. I had seen plenty of horror movies, and I had seen plenty of gore on the internet to know the difference. I placed a hand on my mouth. I felt the air vacate my lungs as I stared on in abject horror. "Judges?" the woman cried out, throwing her arm as the cheap camera swung around to highlight 3 people sitting at a table. They wore black masks with zippers that formed smiles for mouths, and white tape that formed X's over their eyes, with small pinpoints in them so they could see the show. One judge held up a 3.8, and the other a 4, and the last judge held up a 3.5. "Our next contestant is Carlos Riviera of Los Angeles," she said, moving on to the next man. This man stood still, wearing no shirt and a simple pair of jeans. He was holding something in his right hand, and his head was hanging low. He looked like he was focusing, concentrating on something, trying to steel himself. He gritted his teeth, clenching them tightly, his body shaking, and suddenly started to yell furiously as he brought a butcher knife up to his neck and started slicing across his throat. The knife cut coarsely through the skin, ripping through flesh. And he didn't get across his entire throat before he fell to his knees and grabbed his gullet with his hands. I saw blood spurting all over the floor, gushing outward from the open wound. His eyes were lit up with fear as he choked on his own blood. "Look at him gush!" the woman cried out, her voice a mixture of false enthusiasm, panic, and something akin to disgust. He collapsed into a pile on the floor, his legs kicking as he struggled to breathe. "Judges?" the woman said again, the camera swinging around once more. The judges held up a 4.8, 4.9, and 4.7 respectively. There were 2 other contestants, but I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the feed and walked over to my window. I had to catch my breath. My heart was racing. What had I just seen? I didn't sleep that night. I could see the man who'd slit his throat. I could see his eyes as he struggled to breathe through a throat full of his own blood. I couldn't see his bloody hands clasping at his neck in a combination of instinct and regret. I could see him kicking on the floor, laying sideways in a pool of his own blood. Every time I closed my eyes, it's all I saw. Needless to say, I dropped the paper on the suicide enthusiasts. What the deep web really is. Alright, so I'm kind of new to Reddit, and my friend recommended I check out a bunch of subreddits. I believe that's what they're called. This is one of them, and I found the premise very interesting. I'm still trying to figure out this god-awful layout, so cut me some slack. I noticed that there are quite a few posts about the deep web here, and even though it's against the rules to doubt anything written here, I still find a lot of the stories doubtful. As someone who has spent years on the deep web, primarily to get drugs and use anonymous message boards, I want to clear up some things surrounding this. Before I start, I don't recommend you use the deep web. Even if you find some sites that work, most of the more well-known ones are either inactive or shut down. I don't recommend getting too deep into it. You will get addicted to using the deep web if you keep using it. Because the deeper you get, the more you know. The more you know, the more you want to know, and so on. I would also like to say that the deep web consists of a lot of criminals, and you should not mess with criminals, so watch your step. Think about the deep web as a chasm full of water. Different fish swim in different depths. The deeper they are, the darker things they deal with. There's no real official hierarchy, so take it with a grain of salt. It's based upon my personal experiences with the deep web, and the further down it is, the harder it is to access. Let's start off with step 1. Step 1. Drug dealers, weird porn, anonymous message boards, mostly without child pornography, arms dealers, stolen goods, prostitutes, etc. Not much to say here. Most of these sites can be accessed with a regular Tor browser. Step 2. Con artists and organizations roam here. When I say organizations, I don't mean Microsoft or Google, but extremists and larger gangs. Usually their message boards are either completely inaccessible or heavily secured, so don't bother accessing these if you're a layman. It's probably best to stay out of their business anyway. The con artists tend to be the people who make themselves out to be hitmen and contraband dealers. Either they're cops or just con artists who want you to waste money on them. Hitmen are rare to come by on the deep web, and they don't roam around on sites that can be accessed by a regular Tor client. Trust me, I've done my research. Step 3. Lights, kiddie porn message boards, and gore sites. Now, this is where you should definitely just fuck off. Don't go there. The kiddie porn message boards is people trading pictures, selling and buying for bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies, mostly Bitcoin though. From what I saw, it was less abuse and mostly just naked children. Now the gore sites aren't like LiveLeak or Best Gore, but everything ranging from HD, torture movies, to cell phone pictures of people getting beat up. It might not sound bad, but it contains very twisted stuff. There's a category of gore dedicated to skull raping live humans. This is where they drill into the victim's skull and then fuck their brains until the person dies. When people go missing, they might end up here, I imagine. It's mostly brown and Hispanic people doing it. Seems to be a low abundance of white people on the site. I imagine that the ones that are there are unlucky tourists. Now, if you figured out how to get here, I have one piece of advice. Avoid posting anything unless you really know what you're doing. The people on gore boards are ruthless, and you really don't want to mess around here. Watching is fine, but be quiet. Step 4. Hacking boards, passworded boards, and hardcore child pornography. Illegal services like legit hitmen also roam here. So this is where you are very careful. Hacking boards are usually pretty locked, but the more open ones tend to discuss how to create effective malware and good hacking software. For someone with a somewhat tech-savvy background, I can assure you that these guys are definitely professionals. I have no idea what the closed hacking boards spend their time doing, but imagine it's based around organizing huge hacking attacks and such. Nobody has any idea what goes on in the passworded board. It is theorized that they are child pornography forums, or that they are boarded links to open boards. Hardcore child pornography is pretty self-explanatory. Usually it involves penetration, but not actual abuse. The adults in the videos seem to love the children more than they hate them. It's kinda like a Pornhub.com for pedophiles. I don't really condone that shit, but with the amount of shit I've seen on the deep web, I'm starting to not care. Hitmen here are very obscure and very strict. So if you want to place a hit on someone, you do it exactly like you tell them to, and if you don't, they won't do it. Step 5. Now this place really takes the cake. It's nearly impossible to access for a layman, and I won't tell you how to do it. It doesn't use .onion addresses. All I'll say is that other people from this subreddit have been there, apparently. Don't trust that they're just regular people. There are streaming sites, similar to Twitch TV, however much laggier and has way simpler layouts, dedicated to abusing people and animals in strange ways. Most of the rooms I've been in have been relatively cheap. You pay $50 to $100, about 0 to 2 bitcoins, to have people tortured your way. The layout is pretty easy to navigate. You click on a stream, and you can pay to have it done. There's a 2-minute stream delay since it obviously goes through a lot of security to avoid getting busted. Like regular streaming sites, there are also popular streamers. These guys cost a whole lot more, but they also use higher quality gear and do specific tasks. For example, there was a kid, around age 5, I'd say, who got his eyeballs cauterized with a blowtorch for $2,000, 5 bitcoins. Usually it isn't this expensive, but children don't grow on trees, so the streamers have to charge more for permanent damage. It works this way because if one person pays, let's say 4 bitcoin for having a child's foot cut off, The next person who happens to have a foot fetish can't have his needs met in the same way. There's a website called Paul's Pressure Tank. The actual URL is different, so don't bother trying. Whose name I will not mention due to safety reasons, has created a pressure tank from scratch. It has a lot of features, the obvious being manipulating pressure, so it can heat up sort of like a brazen bowl. For those who don't know what a brazen bowl is, it's a bowl made of brass with a hatch on top. The victim is thrown into it, and the bowl is heated up. The person is then roasted to death. Inside the tank there is a camera, and for a range amount of money, 2 to 5 bitcoins, you can have a person, child, teenager, adult, or oldie, no discrimination, killed in exactly your way. I don't know what it's capable of, but after seeing a person being roasted alive, and another killed due to high pressure, I'm not interested in seeing more. Allegedly, it has sprinklers that can fill the tank with a liquid of your choice. Acid, hot water, piss, anything. But I'm not sure if this is true. This place also contains heavy R equivalents of child porn sites. If you want to know more, check out Heavy R, and imagine that they're all children. This is only a microscopic part of the deep web, and there is much more to see. And there's much more I could tell you. I don't want to say more at the moment, since it's already very risky of me to post this on a public site. There isn't exactly a sea of people using these sites, and it would be very easy to find me if it wasn't due to the fact that I'm hiding behind a proxy. So I will just leave this here, and I hope I cleared some things up. This isn't my main account, so maybe you'll meet me somewhere else.